Do you suffer? Do you feel too much pressure? Are you overwhelmed? Do you struggle with meaning? Have you lost your spark, your passion? What about the unknown? Does it scare you? Does the thought of death terrify you? There's an epidemic of these undesirable experiences, and this video is an invitation to help bring more awareness around anxiety, depression, and existential fears and insecurities. This is a very personal experience, one where we often feel all alone. Therefore, it's of the utmost importance to get to know ourselves there, and to start building a more accepting and trusting relationship with oneself. If that calls to you, then this message is for you. First off, you have to stop judging others so harshly, and we have to take more accountability. Criticism, meanness, gossip, and blame are all defenses that keep us focusing externally rather than within, separating us from others and ultimately ourselves. Sure, you will naturally assess people and situations, but what will be unnecessarily added? People will do things that we don't like or agree with, but can you assess or talk about a person without the added harshness, meanness, and devaluation? Or can you breathe instead of blame and project? Our conversations are one of the most important happenings in this life. Our words are like ripples in a pond and can be the difference between understanding or fear, hurt or kindness, love or hate. What will be your contribution to the pond of life? But there's a catch. Be careful not to play a whole new trick on yourself in the name of righteousness. There's a name for this. We call it the superego. The superego is the judge and punisher. Superego says, "The goodness in me hates the badness in you." Furthermore, the goodness in me hates the goodness in you. We've all been on the receiving end of that mind game. And that's not so super, is it? Know that everyone experiences the same thing differently. Therefore, when we judge, we can only judge one's behavior because we do not know their experience. Psst, hey, the same thing applies when we judge ourselves. When you judge others, you have to go to that place and become the judgment, become the thought. So the question arises, is it really a reflection of them? Or is it a reflection of you? Ultimately, the judgment just might be pointing to where we need healing. That's a great place to segue into the subject of forgiveness. You must forgive someone first before you can begin to truly understand their experience and behavior. Furthermore, you must forgive yourself first before you can begin to truly understand you. Above is the original statement I wrote a few years ago, and although it seemed right at the time, it is actually not truth and not whole. After posting this and thinking more on it, I realized that never before had I simply forgiven others or forgiven myself as a first step, and that, in fact, it's the other way around, in which, through understanding the other person's experience or through understanding my own experience, was the true path to forgiveness revealed. It all depends on how deeply you are willing to meet others and how deeply you are willing to meet yourself. And to the trauma survivors, those of you who have endured horrific acts of violence and abuse, I would say that it isn't always essential to understand what drove the other person. No need to verbally forgive them either. It may not be wise or safe. Your compassion could be used against you, or the person could use it to bypass his or her own inner work. Maybe that invites a dangerous person back in your life. In that case, just forget about them altogether if necessary. That may not be your job. Turn that over to the universe. They are on their own path. Make this all about you and how deeply you are willing to be present for you. You have a choice. You can either use what happened to you to grow harder, more closed off, and more cold, or you can meet what happened with openness, compassion, and self-nurture, thus growing softer, more open-hearted, and more warm towards yourself, others, and life. Often, people have something painful brought upon them, and they then begin the spiritual practice of non-forgiveness. They may even go their whole lives living in a state of non-forgiveness, indefinitely bonded to that which hurt them. When you open to meet the pain, both with or without the narrative, and nurture yourself there, you begin to live instead in a state of forgiveness, a state of grace. The pain as your guide, you are shown the direct path of fear and hardening, or the pain as your guide, you are shown the direct path back home to the heart consciousness, the path of opening and softening, the path of self-nurture, building a more trusting and soulful relationship with yourself, which then ripples out to all others. Forgiveness is your new spiritual practice. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Ultimately, there's only harmony or disharmony. When processed through the will of the heart, that which ails you will be brought into balance or fall away. What doesn't get healed and integrated becomes the personality, and the personality directs one's path, directing one's destiny. Tempered in the fires of fear, confusion, rage, hate, shame, and catalyst, choose to emerge unprotected, open-hearted, and free. Now let's talk about intention. Intention is an aim, a plan, a goal, and a desire. It's a driving force, and it lays the groundwork to possible outcomes of each quest and experience. And energy will rush in to support everything that's involved based on the intent. Be impeccable with your intentions. You want to help someone? Well, are you helping them with a hidden motive? Motive that will later poison the relationship? Helping someone with a hand reached out to them, holding maybe money or food or flattery, while the other hand is hiding behind your back with a contract that says, "I'll help you, but if you take my offerings, just know that you will enter a secret deal with me where you must fulfill my need for validation, my pleasures, and my purpose. Oh, and you can never leave me." That's obviously a tainted connection from the get-go, and begs the question, are you in it for them, or are you in it for you? That's just a quick example, but the list of intentions is infinite. Start becoming mindful of your daily intentions. Intention is like a dial, tuning a radio just right so as to receive the desired broadcast. Tune carefully. Now let's talk about becoming an alchemist. We are raised to believe that everything is either good or bad, and that everything that is bad is wrong. That's only true when one doesn't understand alchemy. What does this have to do with alchemy? Alchemy is the process of transforming a material from one chemical composition and form into another. The goal is to transform a less desirable substance into something of more value. Psycho-emotional alchemy is no different. It's the practice of taking a less desirable circumstance and state of being and converting it into a greater value. It's taking something, no matter how horrible, no matter how painful, no matter how challenging, and instead of it being something that drains you, you turn it into something that empowers you. It's turning the ugly into gold. This is how we maintain our power instead of being thrown to and fro like a pendulum. This is how we rise above those lower levels of fear and fear-based actions. Good news, we have free will, yes. In fact, we have so much free will that we can choose fear and bondage. Or, without any bypassing, the key is to integrate the pain and challenges into your life and continue to build a trusting relationship with yourself. And now it's time to come back home to the body. When we get uncomfortable within our own skin, we immediately find something to escape, override, or distract us from the discomfort. Drugs, food, sex, TV, etc. Society has taught us this, and it's deeply embedded in us. So it actually seems counterintuitive to just stay with the emotion instead of escape. But we have this all backwards. The emotions, the body, it's all trying to tell you something. Is it trying to tell you that there's an immediate threat? Or neglect maybe? Is it trying to tell you that the people you surround yourself with, or your actions, may not be in alignment with your own soul? How are you supposed to build a trusting relationship with yourself if you continue to reject and escape yourself too? Well, here's to the new you. No longer running, hiding, distracting, numbing. I stay with whatever feelings may arise in me, no matter how painful and uncomfortable. No more survival mode, the movements of mind which keep me from experiencing fear and pain and other discomforts. Thus, I'm kept from ever truly healing. I will ride the pain all the way back home to the heart consciousness, to vulnerability, to humility, to openness, to softness, to truth, to connection. No matter how painful, I nurture and love myself through until peace and clarity emerges once again. Finally, this is how I heal. This life demands your full participation. If you want to learn a new language, well then you got to get in there and mix it up with others. If you want to learn how to drive, well then you got to jump behind the wheel. If you want healing, well then dive in. As promised, I saved the best for last. Death and the fear of the unknown. When I was young, I suddenly became overwhelmed one day by the thought of death. I was 14 years old, and the limitations of my rational mind could do nothing to protect me from the sudden mystery of death. And because life and death are one and the same, I inadvertently had an equal fear of life. I inadvertently had an equal fear of my body and myself. Everything seemed out of control. It was like a dark hole in my experience, and I wanted no part of it. So I did everything I could to avoid feeling my way around that great empty void. I tried to distract myself by filling all my time with family, friends, sports, TV, and all other distractions. It was a gut-wrenching feeling to not have any answers for the thousands of questions that suddenly sprung into my awareness at such a young age. It was all too much for me and caused me great suffering when I just wanted to continue being a normal kid. I started going to church out of fear and became a member of the predominant religion where I lived. I hoped to find answers there, but found even more daunting questions and more people with the same fears. I could not answer these gargantuous questions and found no one who truly could. It haunted me at all hours, aching for answers. I was willing to adopt any belief that sounded pretty and romantic just to ease my fears, but was presented with too many egoic stories and distortions of truth. It became an ever-present, nagging pain within me that I referred to as the fear of the unknown. When children, even adults, fear the dark, it's because of what they cannot see. When one is burdened with a fear of death, it is not necessarily the fear of physically dying itself, but rather a great fear of the unknown, not knowing what lies beyond and the nature thereof. In other words, we are like children in a dark room. So in order to transform fear, we must bring the light of awareness to all dark unknowns. But I was just a child and didn't know where to begin. Fortunately/unfortunately, I had these recurring dreams that forced me to deal with these terrifying questions. And for 22 years, I felt like these dreams only haunted me. But that all changed in 2016 when I reached 36 years old. I can now see the dreams as the gift that they were always meant to be. I'll elaborate. In these dreams, I would find myself standing in the front yard of the house where I grew up on a beautiful sunny day. In my dream, my best friends were playing catch with a football across the street, and everything was familiar to me and in order. Then a very large being would appear in front of me. A black being, like a silhouette, an iridescent void of nothingness. It asked me hair-raising questions about all of existence, about my attachments, and all my beliefs, which I could not answer at that stage of my evolution. It would ask me questions such as, why are you here, alive on this planet? Is there a God? Where do you go when you die? Do you go anywhere when you die? Where did you come from? Did you come from anywhere? I simply had no answer for such dreadful questions, and then would become very afraid. But then there was one question that I could indeed answer. The being would ask me, "Who are you?" I began to answer, telling the story of I, me, and mine as I experienced it in that time of my life. It was all I could perceive, the only reality I knew, and therefore it was easy to answer. I started to talk and tell the story just poured out of me. But then something very scary happened. After proudly revealing myself to this being, it somehow would take my story away entirely. And it would then ask me again, "Who are you?" I would try to answer, but now I had no story. I would suddenly become terrified. Desperately, I would then search for anything to attach to, anything familiar that could offer me a sense of identity and security. With my eyesight, I would frantically scan the environment, desperate to reclaim my identity. The moment my eyes met something, this being would take those away too. It would suck them in as though a black hole sucks in all cosmic life. I see the trees, they then vanish. I see my friends, then they vanish. I look to my house, then it would vanish. I look to the sun, then it would vanish too. But thank God, at least I still had my body. Wrong. That too eventually vanished. This being sucked up everything I knew, my entire existence. Then it would ask me again, "Who are you?" Now completely scared and in a state of panic, I would suddenly become aware that I am dreaming. I would yell out in the dream as loud as I possibly could to try and force my sleeping self awake. And it would work. I would wake up sweating, heart pounding. I was finally free from the dream, but now I had a whole new problem. In waking life, it wasn't any better, because the dreams were still very fresh with me, and so I would wake with all my security still missing, and I would feel tremendous fear and vulnerability. At that point, everything just seemed surreal and meaningless and fragile. I had no security anymore. My whole world was gone forever. I was only 14 years old, and life as I knew it would never be the same. So now fast forward, and there I was, 22 years old, 36 years later, lying in a hospital bed in Germany. Having lost everything due to years of addiction, a failed marriage, broken-hearted, homeless in another country, no money, alone, scared, unable to speak the language at that time, and consumed by shame and despair. All I could think about was ending my life. But then something happened. I remembered the very thing that I spent 22 years running from and avoiding: death and the fear of the unknown. I suddenly filled with overwhelming fear and vulnerability again, just like when I was 14. But only this time, I was ready. This time I had nowhere to run to. This time I had nothing to lose. It was then that I remembered the dream. But something was different. A shift happened, and instead of fear, I started to feel warm all over. In that moment, I could see how the dreams paralleled my life. I would get my life together, start amassing material things, a big beautiful home, nice cars, all the toys, and I would start accruing fulfilling stories about attachments and my identity. The I growing more substantial and a greater sense of security. But just like in the dreams, the entity would strip it all away from me, time and time again, and now laying there in the hospital bed with no material things and no home to return home to, I saw the entity again, the destroyer of worlds, in my mind's eye, and it asked me, "Who are you?" And it was right then that I finally got the lesson. The experience I had in that moment goes beyond words, but I'll do my best to try and articulate it. In that moment, it was as though a veil was lifted. Not a material veil, but rather an energetic veil made of limiting beliefs and perceptions. And the strangest thing happened. It was suddenly as though everything was conscious, and everything loved me. The bed I was in, the sheets, the pillow, and even the walls loved me. It was the most nurturing experience I have ever had, and for the first time in my life, I had the experience that I was absolutely secure, embraced in the ever-present mind of the universe. I then filled with a feeling of pure love and hugged myself and laughed and cried until the sun came up. Yeah, I looked like a crazy person in the crazy hospital, go figure. But that night, I healed a lifetime of shame and completely healed my fear of death and the unknown. It was then that I realized that I was not homeless. I recognized that I was home in my body and home in the universe. And once you've walked this path back home, congratulations, you've come a long way. You've come home. And once you've come home, you recognize that you are home no matter where you are. Furthermore, you recognize that you were always home. Your sense of I no longer derived from stuff, and more stuff. Your sense of I is no longer derived from the stories and beliefs grafted upon you by society or your family. Your sense of I now comes from a much deeper place, a relevant, honest, sincere, and eternal place. Stories come and go. Stories can be lost. Stories eat up other stories all the time. But what you discovered is that which can never be lost. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's the system, the makeup of a story. But what you discovered is free of story, thus free of rules. This is the awakening of consciousness, or rather, the recognition of consciousness. Consciousness is the moment you receive life before the mind arises, before critique, before expectations, before minimization, before the stories. In order to be moved, you must become something that is movable. In order to be distracted, you must become something that is distractible. In order to be worthless, you must become something that is unworthy. In order to be scared, you must become something that is fearful. In order to be lost, you must become something that is losable. What exactly is it that can be so fragile and manipulated so easily and so often? The answer? A story. Do you see your partner through the filter of your stories? Or do you see the truth of who they really are? Do you see your child or your baby through the filter of your stories? Or do you see the truth of who they really are? Do you see yourself through the filter of your stories? Or do you see the truth of who you really are? And God? It all starts with a story. From our stories comes our beliefs and intentions. From our beliefs and intentions comes our everyday thoughts and feelings. From our everyday thoughts and feelings comes our actions and behaviors. From our actions and behavior comes our character. From our character comes our destiny. Now then, the beginning, the middle, and the end of this system can be changed. It all starts with a story. I feel blinded.